Yeah. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, boys and motherfucking girls. This is your captain with no name speaking, and I'm here to rock your world with a tale that will soon be classic about a woman you already know. No prostitute she, but the mayor of your brain. Pussy control.
You ready?
Begins in a schoolyard, a little girl skipping rope with her friends. A tisket, a tasket, no lunch in her basket, your school books for the...
Hi, I'm Jacob. This is Weebservations, and that was a lightly edited, I promise, clip from Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, Golden Wind, which is specifically Jojo's Bizarre Adventure Part 5, which is specifically the gayest one.
どうせ意識がねえんだから持ってきたんだ。この味は嘘をついてる味だぜ。Giorno Giovanna.
So what is Jojo's Bizarre Adventure anyway, and why should you care? Well, it's a long-running shonen manga that has existed since the mid-80s, that is still running today. So it's difficult to sum up in a short amount of time, but all you really need to know is that it originally started as the adventures of a young man who's an affluent heir to a very rich British family around the turn, I think, of the 20th century. His name is Jonathan Joestar, and his affluent family adopts a young urchin named Dio, who turns out to be just the worst person you can imagine. Just an evil, crappy bully who unfortunately gets super vampire powers. He becomes a super vampire through complicated means. And the rest of the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is about Jonathan and his descendants throughout time and space and, across the world, fighting either Dio himself or, over time, the remnants of Dio's evil. Because even though you can take down the immortal vampire if you really try hard enough, there's always some echoes of evil that exist in the world. And so you have Josuke and Jotaro and Joseph and all these other Jojos fighting evil in their own ways. And it changes genres and styles as the story progresses through the decades, and that's JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. So what makes Part 5 different? What makes it so... what you saw in the opening seconds of this video?
なぜ僕にこんな能力があるのか知らないが、せいぜい利用させてもらうかな。
So, one of the first things that popped into my head when watching Golden Wind was the ye olde meme, and by ye olde I mean like, what, maybe 2 years old or something like that. Be gay, do crime, or be gay, do crimes, if you prefer. This was popularized, I believe, on Reddit by like super lefty circles, like DSA, Antifa kind of circles, and it's just 4 words that don't necessarily mean anything on their own, but if you're gay, I think you look at it and you understand immediately what it means. And so I'm going to explain what it means to the rest of the world through JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and explain why, hopefully we'll get you to understand why people kept tossing that around after Night in the Woods came out, and I think further popularized it. But I think Be Gay, Do Crime is basically a 4-letter description of Giorno and his friends in Passione in the story of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Golden Wind.
ちゃんとホテルまで正直に送り届けてよ。はい、正直に送り届けます。 ただし、空っぽのバッグだけですけどね。待て！じゃあ。
So just looking at the plot, the be crime part seems pretty easy, right? So the story starts out, we are several decades into the future of the Joestar line, and a young man named Giorno is sort of breaking the mold as far as JoJo's protagonists go. So most JoJo heroes have been direct descendants, in fact, I guess all of them at this point have been direct descendants of our hero, Jonathan Joestar, as in, like, his lineage carried down directly to these people, even if they're illegitimate children, or whatever the case may be, the proud, heroic Joestar blood runs in their veins. But Giorno is a little different. See, the way that Dio is finally taken out, I guess you could say, Jonathan, the Joestar, his story didn't end so well. He actually died protecting the world from Dio, and in the process got decapitated, and Dio's head was attached to his shoulders. And so when they finally defeat Dio, a little later down the line, they're actually killing Jonathan Joestar's body with Dio's head attached to it. And Giorno is the son of that and some lady that Dio met someday and decided to have a fling with, and she, carried the pregnancy out. So that means that Giorno is in a unique position of being the son of both Jonathan Joestar, the original Joestar, and the greatest villain that, infects, he's both good and evil, I guess, is that his blood carries both forces within it. And when we're introduced to him, he is definitely living out more of the Dio side of his blood than the Joestar side. He's a petty criminal. He's a pickpocket. He takes people's belongings, sells them for petty cash, and gives a little bit. He's a little Robin Hood-like in that he gives to the less fortunate. But for the most part, he's certainly not the hero that we would expect. Even the delinquent type heroes, like rough and tough, like Fist of the North Star type brigands, who are really have a heart of gold. It's none of that whatsoever. He's sort of he's a slippery Robin Hood at best, and just sort of petty, selfish thief at worst type character.
ワインでも飲むかね。極上のキャンティクラシコがある。
何も渡してはならないし、何ももらってはいけないと言われています。
言ってるだけだよ。人間とは言ってることとやってることは違うんだな。坂が人間の良さであり、悪しきところなんだがね。
But he does have a moral code, and that's where we run into the plot, which is that Giorno encounters Bruno Bacciarati, who is a hitman, basically a rough-em-up guy for the biggest mafia group in the city in Italy, Passione. And so he realizes that Passione is the organization responsible for getting a lot of kids hooked on drugs and just crime that really feels like it has no justification, stuff that's just preying on the weak and innocent, right? Not that crime necessarily has a justification, but it does in this story, and that's where we're going to get into the be gay, do crime sort of thing. But Giorno has the brilliant idea to basically take down this criminal enterprise by becoming its leader, by taking it over from the inside. He converts Bruno with his thinking. He's like, hey, I know that we're both from the streets, but I want to, I want these underground organizations to be doing, better for the world, I guess. So I'm going to take over Passione, which is the most intimidating and powerful mafia syndicate in Italy. And I'm going to become a gang star, in his words, and rise to the top of the ranks, and I want to take you with me. And, get some men who are on your side, in your corner, and don't tell them about the plan, but I want your support. And so that is the plot. So that's a lot of do crime. That's about as much do crime as you can possibly fit in a story and still have the protagonist be supposedly sympathetic. So where does the be gay stuff come in, besides the obvious?
なんだろうとお前の口の中に入れることができるんだぜ。
So to understand the queer messaging and the queer subtext of Golden Wind, which was written in 1995, you have to understand the queer subtext of what's come before. And fortunately for us, gay subtext of the 80s is a lot easier to process and recognize than gay subtext of the 90s, where things were much more diverse and complicated for good, by the way. It was good for queer art, the 90s. But also very different. And so when looking back at early JoJo's and how things are characterized early on, and I don't mean the obvious things. I don't mean the rippling pectorals. I don't mean the huge bara bodies. I don't mean the flamboyant posing. I don't even mean Joseph in a dress offering soldiers tequila. I don't mean any of that, weirdly enough.
Why don't you take a hike? There's nothing to see, so knock it off with a steering, would ya? I said beat it, you little ankle biters! Get out of here! Take off! Abdul, hurry up and get off me before this gets any worse! I'm trying as hard as I can! All right, I'll be the one to move! Mr. Joestar, please slow down! Ha ha!
What I'm most interested in is the characterization of heroism and how the heroes, the previous JoJo heroes, differ from Giorno, and what makes Giorno feel more like a realized gay hero who embraces his queerness compared to what came before. And so, for an example, let's look back at the part of JoJo's that jumped out to people most, that got most people's attention. It's sort of the, it's sort of the gateway drug into JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which is part 3, which is Jotaro. And We meet Jotaro for the very first time in a jail cell. Not because he was arrested or he did anything bad, even though he's a little of a delinquent, he's a little of an outsider, and he's gruff and he's a little scary, but he actually hasn't done anything wrong. He turned himself in and demanded to be put in jail, even though he has committed no crime. And that's where we begin our story. And the reason for this is that Jotaro, they're all Jojo, Jotaro has discovered his superpower, his thing that he later realizes that lots of people have, but he is initially shocked to discover that there's this like psychic being within him that can, has great power and is like sort of frightening and imposing. And his first response to, even though he's this big, rough, quiet, scary guy, his first response to realizing that he has this weird, freakish superpower inside of him is to hide away from the world, and because he's afraid of hurting someone. Like, he even yells at his mom to get away from him and stuff like that. And that's very interesting to me because of where stands come from. Stands come from the awakening of Dio, who Dio is characterized as a villain, as he's a big gay villain. He seduces men and women alike. He is very flamboyant. He has long colored nails, and he, everybody talks about his incredible eroticism, like how fucking hot he is. And these are a bunch of dudes talking about this.
Golden hair and translucent alabaster skin, but most of all, a dubious sensuality, the kind you wouldn't expect from a man. Every word he spoke calmed my heart. The dangerous sweetness in his voice is precisely what makes him so terrifying.
Avdol, come here.
His awakening brings out these psychic powers and all these people connected to the bloodline who are strong enough, who have whatever, who have the capacity to have these psychic powers. And so Dio, this big gay villain coming back to life, awakens this power in Jotaro, and his first instinct is to lock himself away until he becomes strong enough with the power of his friends to defeat the evil. And this is extremely similar to a lot of movies from the 80s. I'm thinking most specifically of the gay terror that hides in Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Which had a gay screenwriter, and likewise The Lost Boys, which is directed by a gay man as well. And in both of these cases, the framing is extremely similar, where there's sort of queerness lurking within the hero that he's frightened of, and the only way to beat it back is to sort of protect, like, he finds himself in a position where he needs to protect a girl who is going to save him. Her soft femininity is going to save him from, the temptation of queer badness, and he basically embraces his masculinity and whatever heteronormativity exists within him in order to beat back the gay demons that are coming out of him. And all this sounds very high concept for sort of schlocky movies like Nightmare on Elm Street and Lost Boys, but sometimes a woodchuck that you hide in your closet behind a giant shirtless picture of Rob Lowe is more than a woodchuck that you hide in your closet behind a giant shirtless picture of Rob Lowe. Now, curiously, while JoJo's does pay homage to these tropes, it's sort of, it hesitates to commit to them as hard as a lot of its forebears and its peers. Jotaro, I call them all Jojo. Jotaro is fighting to protect a woman, his mother, and he is very adhering to these like hyper-masculine stereotypes, and he's becoming a big, strong hero in the traditional way to take down the big gay villain, but he's doing it all through male bonding. There isn't really a point besides saving his mother, who's back home and not part of this super bro cruise that they're going on through Egypt. He doesn't really interact with women or have meaningful relationships with them. And this continues into part 4 and other aspects of JoJo's, is that you see women are always sort of not misogynistically framed exactly, but sort of framed as other, or as intimidating for the most part. What really sticks out to me is the story about Yukiko Yamagishi, I think is her name, in part 4, where this is not Josuke himself, it's not the JoJo in question, but Koichi, who is basically the protagonist of part 4. I think Araki got a little tired of the JoJo character in writing this and focused more on a secondary character, who is notably a sort of a mouse mousy, nerdy. He's not the hyper masculine stereotype that the JoJos are, and he gets threatened. He's threatened by this girl who is obsessively in love with him, and he has to take her down because he's like, no, I'm not interested in you, and but he does so with love and affection, like, you know, we can be friends and I care about you, but like this is all too much for me. You're frightening. You scare me. And so women are either sort of benign agents of support that have to be protected in JoJo's, or with rare exception, or they're Yukiko Yamagishis. They're frightening but very fun villains. And this is really interesting to me. Also, just as a very limited sidebar, I think one of the things that speaks to JoJo's queer subtext is the fact that it has these sort of old Fist of the North Star, hoary, like, seinen, a man's path sort of tropes throughout it, and yet all of the most ardent JoJo's fans that I know are women. The complete lack of female agency, for the most part, in the story of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure does not seem to bother women, I note, and I wonder if it's because of how unabashedly queer and open-hearted the story is.
Oh, Koichi. My plan was to turn you into an outstanding man, but recent events have forced me to change my mind. So until you fall madly in love with me, you will remain in this house. And make no mistake, you are going to love me! Or else.
So all of that said, and I know it's a lot to take in, what makes Giorno different from all the JoJos that have come before it? What makes Golden Wind feel so outwardly and enthusiastically queer compared to sort of the hedging and the evolution that has taken place before? What makes me love Giorno so fucking much? What makes me love this character so intensely? Because he's immediately my favorite of the JoJos, and Part 5, I'm only like 8 episodes into it, and it's already my favorite. If it gets worse, I'm not sure I even care. What about this show is so fucking gay that makes me so happy?
彼は自分がこの世の数だと信じるようになり、彼もまたこの街にあふれる心のねじ曲がった人間の一人に育っていくことは時間の問題だった。
Well, unlike all the other characters that have come before him, Giorno is not inherently good. And yet, the story is interested in promoting the idea that he is a hero because he is not good in the ways that previous JoJos have been. This is a really fascinating concept for me, and it's all explained, frankly, through Giorno's backstory. When we're introduced to him as a little child, they explain that on the outside, that Giorno has a pack of cool friends that he hangs out with every day, that he has a loving mother and a father, even though he's a bastard, he's got his mom married. And on the outside, from any practical standpoint, someone just observing this child's life, they would think probably that he's pretty normal and has a happy childhood, right? Well, that's not true. As it turns out, Jojo's mother is incredibly negligent. She doesn't really care about him at all, and mostly just got married for the financial support, and her husband beats the shit out of Giorno. And so he's abused or neglected at home, and his friends that he hangs around with just like to exploit him because he's a bastard kid, and they bully him, and they make fun of him, and it's a bad situation. So he's really getting bullied everywhere, and nobody notices or takes a stand to help. Until one day, when Giorno is wandering around the street, he runs into a bunch of gangsters who ask if he's seen a mobster around that they're hunting down, and he did. He saw hiding in an alleyway. There's this guy who's beaten to the brink of death, and he decides not to tell the mobsters who are obviously pursuing this guy where he went. And the man, recovers and sneaks away and thanks him. And suddenly Giorno finds that his life has started improving. His father no longer beats him, his friends are nice to him, and all of this, and it's very confusing for him that all this has changed very quickly over a matter of days, until he realizes that mobster he saved was so grateful that he went out of his way to say, like, don't do anything to that kid. So basically, anytime anyone was ever causing Giorno trouble as a child, they would be intimidated by this guardian angel that he acquired. And he knows that this man to be a bad dude because he's seen him kill people and carry out things for the mafia. But he's the only person who has actively improved Giorno's life at all. And so he thinks, well, he's a criminal, but I don't think he's evil. So what does that mean? Well, it means the system is broken. And this justifies Giorno's life of petty thievery and giving back to people less fortunate immediately in his mind, or at least over the next couple of years. Because once his stand awakens, once he has this superpower, which notably is to give life, so unlike previous JoJo's, almost all their superpowers have been based around punching people. So Jonathan Joestar, no superpowers, he punches people. Joseph Joestar, sort of a key energy, like the power of Hamon, which, like, you know, increases his muscular, he punches people. And the Jotaro also punches people. And then Josuke is a little different in that he punches people and then repairs the damage. So he breaks things and then repairs it, but he breaks things. And Giorno's superpower is to take inanimate things, dead things, things that do not have life, and to imbue them with life. And anyone who harms that thing, once it is alive, receives the damage that they did unto it. And so his superpower is giving life where things were dead before. And it becomes clear that that is what he wants to do by taking over this criminal syndicate.
キエの攻撃が僕に返ってきた。僕は君のものを取った。なのに僕への攻撃を手加減していたことが君のダメージを見ると逆によくわかる。君はいい人だ。
When people say the phrase "be gay, do crime," they don't literally mean that you should go out and start, like, you know, busting up the Circle K or whatever. They don't mean literally that you should go out and mug people. What people are saying when they say "be gay, do crime" is that when you are gay, your very existence can be a crime. That to live in the world as a queer person, even now, even especially as if you're trans, as trans rights are being litigated to hell and back, and gay marriage is still threatened to be rolled back by people who would wish it to be so. Your very existence can be criminalized, and so to be gay is to do crime to some extent in the world, and so even if you're not carrying out petty thievery or whatever the case may be, it is acknowledgement that the system does not determine your moral right to live as you are, and that to acknowledge that the system is broken is to be a hero, which means sometimes to do crime, to be gay, is to be heroic. And that is exactly what Giorno is doing.
なぜ僕を助けた？盗人のお前に恩ができたなんて思わないからな。あのじいさんはどうしようもなかった。すごく嫌な気分だ。自分の行動は正しいと信じているが、とてもどす黒い気分なんだ。しかし、そうだとしても、このジョルノ・ジョバーナには正しいと信じる夢がある。
Like many queer little boys, on the outside, his childhood seemed to be perfectly normal. He has a nuclear family and friends and everything, but there is something on the inside of him he knows that makes him different, and other people can sense it, and they abuse him for this. Even unseen, there are harms that queer children go through that they can't explain to the world. They know from a much younger age, I think, from non-queer children, from privileged children, more privileged children at least, that the world is broken, that the system is broken, and that acting outside of it sometimes is necessary. I think queer kids learn to lie to themselves and to others at a much younger age, and all of that they punish themselves for until they can learn to embrace that as justified, as evidence that changes need to be made.
奇妙なことだが、悪事を働き、法律を破るギャングがジョルノの心をまっすぐにしてくれたのだ。政治家が汚職をやり、警官が弱者を守らない町で、ジョルノ・ジョバーナは生きるための目的を見つけた。ギャングスターに憧れるようになったのだ。
And this can get a little dicey. It gets dicey when acquiring non-queer allies, because are they only going to see the crime? Are they only going to see the Dio part of your existence, of what you have to do in order to be safe, to exist in the world, the coping mechanisms that you developed, or are they going to see the Jonathan? Are they going to see the Joestar? And this is summed up really beautifully in a scene where that hero I mentioned, Part 4 Koichi. I told you that Araki seems a little more concerned with the side characters from Part 4, but Koichi from Part 4 meets Giorno, and it was his job to determine whether or not this guy is going to be the next Dio, because he's his son. And he calls Jotaro, the hero from Part 3, and says, hey, this guy saved my life. I know he seems like a petty criminal, and he seems kind of dodgy, but, like, I think he's a good guy. And this is all being shown at the same time. This phone call is intercut with Giorno blowing a capo's head off with a banana gun. But to be fair, once again, Giorno's power is not to directly harm, but to give life to dead things, and those who would harm those things, those now living things, this, fat ass eating a banana, receives harm for doing so, shoots himself in the head. So you can say, was that justified? Is what Giorno doing right? And I think that there's room for argument on that, but I don't think there's much room to argue that what he's doing is heroic in some way, that his desire to change the system is worth applauding and embracing. And this is even more clear to me, not just because Giorno is doing this, but because he's not doing it alone. And we don't know a whole lot about his new friends just yet, but we've learned the backstory of just a couple of them, and immediately there's a pattern of this person was wronged by the system, and they live a life of crime now because they were right and the system was wrong, and they found they had no choice but to live outside of it. And so that Dio Jonathan thing is not just for Giorno, and not just for other people judging Giorno, but for other queer people, other outcasts, like this band of ne'er-do-wells who dance to Pussy Control while they hang a guy by his eyelids. It's also justifying to them that they can be heroes. And I don't know that that's where the story is going, but from what I can tell, that seems to be what's happening, is that Giorno isn't just going to take down this criminal enterprise. He's going to convince criminals that they can be heroes. That this ex-cop who was wronged because, cops are corrupt and they're paid off, and anybody who's a bad enough criminal who's made enough money from it, who goes to prison, can pay themselves right back out. All of that stuff was wrong and forced him out of the profession. And so, that is not his fault. And he needs to stop beating himself up for that and learn to embrace his criminality as heroism. And so, long story short, Giorno is very gay, and he's very much a criminal, and I think that that doesn't mean that he's a queer villain. It means he is a hero who embraces his queerness, and despite the world telling him that it is wrong. And I really just absolutely fucking dig it, and I can't wait to see more. And the last thing I want to say is, I'm sure there's some concern. Am I implying that Hirohiko Araki, the legendary creator of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, is gay? Well, yes and no, because I am not saying that I think I understand this person's sexuality or that I am trying to project onto them, because that's their business and private life in Japan, regardless of being out as queer, which is already difficult to do for high-profile creators in America, and in Japan, regardless of the level of conservatism versus liberalism, depending on what segment of pop culture you happen to be involved in, Araki is a public figure in Japan, which means that his private life is very private. Japan takes people's private life, regardless of their sexuality, much more seriously. So I don't expect him to be out, and I don't expect him to say exactly what the nature of his sexuality is. However, I do not feel guilty or bad or anything for saying there is queer subtext to his work, because I don't think there's anything wrong, much like Giorno, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying somebody can be gay by default. I don't think we're all straight by default, and that we have to say that, oh, well, accusing somebody of being gay, that's serious, because the default is hetero, and we can't assume that anybody is anything otherwise, or that would be negative. I don't believe that. I think that you can say, well, this person's work seemed queer, and whether or not they are or not is not really my business, but I don't have any problem whatsoever with talking about the subtext as it comes through. Anyway, regardless of his sexuality, I think we can all agree that Hirohiko Araki is an undead vampire that has probably been around for 300 years and will continue to be around for 1,000 more.
原木先生はハンサムだし、年取らねえじゃねえかよ。
永遠の時を生きる妖精さんだから。
So, do you agree with my perspective that JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is kind of gay and only getting gayer? Voice your feelings in the comments about these thoughts, about these observations I have, and I'm just going to leave you with the lyrics to the amazing opening theme for Golden Wind, and just a little sort of gayish sounding poetry to send y'all off. Sayonara, bye-bye, until the next Weebservations, and hope you guys have a gay old time watching JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
ファイティング自分の道を信じたものだけがいつか輝ける命の限り神にも逆らい戦い続ける不屈の魂たちよファイティング